So many thanks to the Rachel Carson Center for having me and for the wonderful opportunity to share a few ideas from my work. I would also like to thank the primary founder of this work, the IFRIS, Institut Francilien Recherche Innovation Société, who supported this research through my postdoctoral contract at the University Gustave Eiffel. I would also like to thank participants of the European Society for Environmental History writing group support who discussed a writing version of these presentations. And finally, I want to thank my fellow comrades at Landhaus who helped me and supported me with my bad English. So, as you will have to do. Sorry, and thanks for your patience and understanding. In the early 70s, the young Gérard Descrambes brought a case of the family wine to the Charlie Hebdo team in Paris. Reiser, Wolinski, Cavana, and the entire newspaper team discovered a biodynamic Saint-Émilion. Over 20 years, they would draw gracefully on some bottle the labels of Gérard wines. I really like this story. It tells the story of the transformations of organic farming after 1968, when it met pragmatically the alternative left. And it can help us to forget how scientist Charlie was. And it also reflects what we know best about French organic farming. The history of French organic farming is almost solely a political one, without nuance. Focusing on a few figures at the national level, it tells the story of the transitions of organic farming from the right of the political spectrum to its left. This period, preceding the environmentalizations of the 70s, is also described in counterpoint as being remote from the scientific world. Such a story does not account for the history of Descrambes family, and many others as well. Nor does it explain what made France the leading European producer of organic products in the early 70s, nor its leading role in the institutionalizations of European organic farming. The story of Gérard's father is that of a small wine grower and Freemason who refused the chemical treatments of wine promoted in the post-war period and became interested in alternative practices. In 1944, he joined the Committee for Hummus founded by agronomists. There, he met an Alsatian agricultural engineer trained in biodynamics. Together, they founded a composting plant using grape marc from the farm, manure from the stud farm, and other local resources. The Winter Hummus brochure refuted the dogma of soluble mineral fertilizers. By developing an intense soil life, it claims to ensure a greater resistance for the plants to disease and parasites. Small wine growers, but also large tobacco unions, became regular customers of Winter Hummus. My work takes seriously the cognitive dimensions, scientific networks, and agricultural practices that are at the core of organic farming. It explores its birth through localizing it in a rich and complex, yet marginalized, environmental knowledge and practices in the main agricultural debates of the 20th century. It highlights the ongoing controversies in different scientific communities, the concern and warning about soil degradations that run through the agricultural profession, and the development of alternative ways of agricultural intensification based on living soils. What's a living soil? It's a way of conserving soils inspired by biology or microbiology and pedology. In French, soil science is called pedology. And today, it's a very fashionable notion. For ecological gardeners and farmers, living soils represents multi-specific words to be careful. Living soils are also tools for managing environmental problems, for example, to clean up pollution, and they are a new El Dorado for agrochemicals. For example, Monsanto has invested heavily in microbial inputs that promise to maximize symbiosis and associations between plants and microorganisms. Third, if the idea of living soil is a scientific category, historically constructed, it's also involved a diversity of attention, promises, and socio-technical projects that I take as the object of my historical investigation. So, what is called studied or put to work as living in cultivated soils between the Great Depressions of interwar period and the crisis of agricultural productivism in the 70s. In the 30s, the study of biological processes of soils, their singular natural history, and their metabolism is valued in a context of overproduction and concern for quality. French agronomists are inspired by Russian soil science, whose introduction in agronomy had previously failed. The soils are then frequently compared to a living organism. In this period of economic crisis, the use of microbial dynamism is readily presented as a way to save money. An agronomist wrote, as you can see, another major contribution to this renewed soil science is to contribute to the definitions of terroir or cru. This soil scientist worked in connection with the Comité National des Appellations d'Origine, which was created in 1935 to deal with the wine crisis and to improve quality of products. The Institut Pédologique du Bas-Rhin also drew up a large-scale soil maps in order to improve the quality of wheat and seed potatoes by adapting them to the terroir. In the pre-war period, the soil was the object of a complex knowledge. It is in this context that one must understand the warm welcome given to the first biodynamics writings that valued the living soil in the major agricultural press. After the Second World War, these approaches were marginalized with the generalizations of fertilizers. With fertilizers, it was possible to get rid of the diversity of soils and the local particularities of cultivation. Soil specialists developed a metrology of the organic matter to be conserved in the soil in order to support agricultural productivity. This is the humic assessment. Such an approach understood soil exclusively in its functions of stability and support for the assimilations of mineral fertilizers. Such an approach was applied to manure. This justifies the replacement of manure by humic substitutes, such as artificial manure, green manures, or straw. Meanwhile, its traditional nutritive function is delegated to chemical fertilizers. Soil was thus increasingly considered as a static entity, a physical support, and a stock of matter to be maintained and consumed rationally. Soils became inert and standard culture supports abstract from their local specificities. But this disappearance of the living and dynamic characters of soils remained a partial and controversial process. Until the mid-50s, many farmers and agronomists were concerned about the loss of soil life in scientific knowledge, but also in the flow of matter in the field. This is particularly evident in the discussions around motorization. Soil devitalizations questions the major transformations brought by motorization, as explained by an expert, as you can read. Such statements can be found in the old and conservative society, Société des agriculteurs de France, in the Académie d'agriculture de France, but also in les chambres d'agriculture, the chambers of agriculture, a key bodies in the rising agricultural profession. Faced with the spectre of the Dust Bowl, a crusade for humus was launched. Members of the Academy of Agriculture encouraged technological alternatives that preserve the life of the soils, such as the multi-truncated disc plough developed by a farmer to protect bacteria that fix the nitrogen in the soil. Manure was identified as the most important issue for almost all chambers of agriculture. The chamber of the Aden, for example, wrote, "The earth is a living being and manure is of paramount importance." Manure was not only important for cattle regions, but also for large-scale farming regions who resisted cereal specializations and refused to abandon their livestock. The Chamber of Agriculture of Seine-et-Oise, a fertile and advanced department north of Paris, summarized the doubts and questions that cross the agricultural road. We do not know if those who cultivate without manure are heading for disaster, and advised to be cautious in reducing the number of animals. The defense of manure, which is composed of straw and animal excrements, represented the alliances between cereal crop and livestock, an integrated crop-livestock farming system. So, until the mid-50s, maximizing the productive phenomena linked to the vitality of soil were technical options that were carefully considered among some agricultural practitioners and experts. The presence of animals in field crops, the promotions of tools that respect the life of soil, organic fertilizers and good manure-making methods were third discussed as possible ways of agricultural intensification. It was only in the second half of the 50s that these options were discarded and reclassified as marginal. Soil life disappeared first in agricultural research, then in the concern of the agricultural profession, which was increasingly involved in the development of agricultural policies and consolidated its ties with the chemicals and agricultural machinery industries. With practices and knowledge about living soils, then became the prerogative of natural food, hygiene and health movements. Microbiologists and agricultural experts who have been marginalized in the agronomic world became involved in these movements. In these movements, the meaning of living soil fully included the health issue, a dimension that have been sometimes present, albeit timidly, in the agronomic and agricultural arenas. L'Association française pour la recherche d'une alimentation normale, the French Association for the Research of a Normal Diet, represented the most academic branch of these movements. It can be compared to the English soil associations in that it represented a large forum militating for living soil, a forum of medical experts, consumers, food fraud inspectors, members of the Académie d'Agriculture, and so on. It has also an important audience. This dense network of advisors works to establish connection between aspects of reality, soil, food, health, that the dominant scientific institution in Europe. The founding doctors of the associations were also involved in the purchase of the Combreau estate, an agricultural and medical establishment. The microbial dimensions enable the circulation of knowledge between soil and human body. In his PhD on the quality of bread, the young physician Jean-Pierre Ruas compared the action of the rhizosphere in plant metabolism to that of the digestive flora in humans. As you can see, in all experiments, composting and its fermentations had a privileged place. On the farm, like in the Decrum family, and in the city with the composting of house waste. The microbial processes are at the heart of the fertility and health chains that links the worlds of soils, plants and animals, and the human one. As you can see in this microbial hexagon. At the center, fumier means manure. In the 60s, the first organic farming associations directly inherited this work from the network of scientists around the French associations for the research of a normal diet. At the end of the 60s, research on living soil, centered on symbiosis and plant associations, experienced a new development at university. They were at the heart of the privileged relationships that were being forged between academics, botanists, young agronomists, and practitioners of organic farming. These new alliances around living soils contributed to the structuration and state recognitions of organic farming in 1980. But I hope to have shown you that these connections between living soils conceptions, farmers and scientists have a long history since early 20th century. As Frank Hucketer points it for the German case, history of living soils is also one of forgetfulness and fabric of ignorance. The birth of organic farming can thus be read through the persistence of a renewal of a concern for soil in agricultural practices and knowledge as a response to the fabric of ignorance about soil life in the modernizing worlds of the post-World War II era. And as I have suggested, its technical practices were forged during the debates on agricultural motorizations and specialization. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to try to answer your questions. But please speak very softly.